My cousin David, a man defined by his smirks and failures, arrived at my uncle's workshop with a cheap, plastic-wrapped toolkit. He presented it to my Uncle Arthur, a 75-year-old master woodworker. With the condescending pity one reserves for a senile child, calling his priceless, and-maintained equipment dangerous junk. He expected my uncle to be grateful, to be cowed. He expected me, the accountant, to be silent and invisible. I just nodded thoughtfully. David had no idea I was watching him on a live video feed. And he was not there to help. He was there to sabotage a safety belt. An act that would trigger the complete destruction of his life. The psychological warfare had begun weeks earlier. It was a masterpiece of elder abuse. A slow-working acid. David started by helping Arthur organize. I arrived one afternoon to find Arthur, the most precise man I knew, sitting in his kitchen, his hands trembling. He couldn't find his father's hand plane, a priceless piece of rosewood and steel he had used for 60 years. He was visibly shrinking, convinced he had lost it. He was sacrificing his own confidence, his own memory, on the altar of David's help. David, of course, had used the most vile deception. "It's okay, Uncle," David said, his voice a sickening syrup of false comfort. "You've got so much junk in here. It's no wonder you can't find anything. We all get a little forgetful." The vile contrast was staggering. While my uncle sat in that kitchen, ashamed to even enter his own sanctuary, convinced his mind was failing, David was whistling. He was in the workshop, not organizing, but finding the tool he himself had hidden, after making Arthur suffer for 3 days. And as David performed this act of false salvation, I was at my laptop, not just doing my remote work, but running property assessments. David wasn't just moving tools. He was manufacturing senility to justify a competency hearing. And I was watching his motive unfold on the county assessor's website. The true act of war, the one that made me act, happened a week later. I got a phone call from Arthur, and his voice was so thin I barely recognized it. "Sarah," he whispered. "I won. I did a terrible thing. I left the main chisel on the lathe bed. I turned it on. The chisel had shattered, embedding shraplets of high-carbon steel into the wall. This was the ultimate sacrifice. Arthur wasn't just in physical danger. He was sacrificing his entire identity. He was a man who preached safety, who had taught generations of apprentices. Now, he was a danger. He told me he was going to sell the shop. That David was right. He had given up. David's deception had been surgical. He had rushed over, full of that poisonous empathy. "Oh, Uncle, don't be so hard on yourself. Thank God you're okay. This is why I've been saying you need me to take over." While Arthur was in the house, broken, confessing his failure, and agreeing to sell his legacy for pennies, I knew David was in the workshop, retrieving the mangled chisel. I knew, with the cold certainty of an auditor, that he had been the one to clean up the night before, the one who subtly placed that chisel where Arthur's muscle memory would find it. David didn't just break a tool, he broke my uncle's spirit to get his signature. I immediately canceled my trip to a career-making conference in Chicago. This was a sacrifice. I lost a $500 non-refundable registration fee, and I forfeited a chance to moderate a panel I had worked a year to get. I sacrificed my own career momentum, trading a boardroom for a dusty workshop. David, of course, mocked my presence. "Still playing with your numbers." "Sarah," he sneered when he saw me at my laptop, the smell of sawdust in the air. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about the real-world stuff up here. I've got it. I'm the one who knows how to build things." He dismissed my entire profession as a hobby. The irony was suffocating. While I was building something far more important, a comprehensive digital inventory of every tool, every serial number, linking high-resolution photos to a spreadsheet, he was helping Arthur in the yard. He was pointing at the roof, telling him the shingles were failing, a fire hazard. He was using my presence as proof of his loving concern. while simultaneously manufacturing another problem to justify a forced sale. He thought I was just counting. He had no idea I was building the evidence list for a future indictment. My most critical investment cost me $20. I felt a profound sense of shame buying the nanny cam. I, a senior financial analyst, was buying a toy. The true sacrifice, however, was the lie I had to tell Arthur. I told him it was for insurance purposes. To watch for thieves. He looked at me, his eyes clouded with the doubt David had planted. A camera Sarah. No one wants this old junk. David was right. It's just junk. David hadn't just gaslit my uncle. He had made Arthur ashamed of his own legacy. My deception had to be just as subtle. Exactly. Uncle, I said, forcing a smile. It's for my peace of mind. I'm an accountant. Remember, we're paranoid. I had to use David's own insult as my cover. The contrast was absolute. While I was balanced on a dark, dusty rafter at midnight, sacrificing my sleep, covered in cobwebs, meticulously routing a tiny power cord so it was invisible, David was at a bar. I knew this because I was already tracking his public social media. He had posted a picture of a whiskey glass, captioned, "To new beginnings. Some people just need to be saved from themselves." He was toasting his own heroism, funded by the very workshop he was planning to gut. He was so convinced of his brilliance, so convinced of my stupidity and Arthur's senility, that he never, ever thought to look up. That arrogance brought him back for the final sabotage. He arrived with the cheap toolkit, the one from the hook. I was already watching the live feed on my phone. "Let me just look at this old thing," David said, patting the vintage lathe that was Arthur's pride and joy. He'd helpfully brought Arthur a coffee, and my uncle politely turned his back to place it on the workbench. In that split second, David's hand darted out. He wasn't stealing. He was doing something far worse. He quickly, expertly, loosened the bolts on the safety belt housing, ensuring the belt would fly off at high speed once the machine was under load. He was trying to terrify Arthur into a sale. He thought the machine would fail later. When Arthur was alone, he thought I was just standing there. The numbers girl. Useless. I let him finish. I let him wash his hands. I let him walk toward the door, his smirk of victory firmly in place. "David, that is so thoughtful of you to check in," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "We were just about to test the new security system. Uncle Arthur, why don't you show him the feed on the big TV, Arthur?" Confused but trusting, hit the button. The large television in the corner of the workshop lit up. "Can you rewind that?" Uncle, I asked. "Just the last 2 minutes." The screen showed David, clear as day, tampering with the safety belt. Arthur went white. He looked at the belt, then at the screen, then at David. David was frozen. His mask of concern shattered. "You." Arthur's voice was a low, shaking rumble. "You could have killed me." David started to stammer, to lie. Arthur pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get out. Get out." David stumbled out, ejected and exposed. He scrambled into his car. His final words screamed from the driveway. "He's senile. He's crazy. And you're controlling him. I'll prove it." While Arthur was inside, sitting down, his hands shaking as he processed that his senility was an attack, David was in his car, furious. He wasn't thinking about Arthur. He was thinking about me. I was the one with the camera. I was the one who had outsmarted him. He had failed to neutralize Arthur. Now, I was his new target. He had to destroy my reputation. I knew exactly where he would go first. He was heading for the social hub of the town, the old hardware store. I needed to make a call. David's counterattack was as predictable as it was pathetic. He didn't just target me. He targeted my reputation. The one currency I valued as much as Arthur valued his wood. The first calls were to our extended family, a web of aunts and cousins who lived on gossip. I had to sacrifice an entire Tuesday, a day my firm was auditing a major client. To field hysterical calls, I lost hours of billable time. my professional focus shattering. All because Aunt Clara was weeping into the phone. The deception was vile. I'm just so worried about him. Clara. David had apparently told her. Sarah is. She's not well. She's isolating him. She won't let any of us see him. The vile contrast of this lie was breathtaking. While I was on the phone, absorbing Aunt Clara's accusations of elder abuse, my other line was buzzing. It was a call I was expecting the confirmation from the geriatric specialist I had secretly contacted. While David was faking medical concern to paint me as an abuser, I was actually scheduling a full cognitive baseline test for Arthur. A test I knew he would pass with flying colors. I was building a legal shield of competency. While David was building a social scaffold of lies, he was trying to isolate me. He was using the family as a weapon. I decided, then and there, I would use the community as a shield. I knew exactly where he would strike next. Henderson's Hardware. It wasn't just a store. It was the town's living room, its courthouse, and its confessional, all run by one man. Mark Henderson. David's entire strategy relied on public opinion, and Henderson's was where it was manufactured. David was counting on them, seeing him as the successful developer and me as the outsider niece. He didn't know about the secret I shared with Mark. It was a secret born from my uncle's sacrifice. For the last year, Arthur's art had suffered. He had stopped buying his prized rosewood finishing oil, a rare blend that cost a fortune. He'd been sacrificing the quality of his own legacy, switching to a cheaper, acrid blend. David's constant borrowing over the years had drained Arthur's savings, a fact Arthur was too proud to admit. His deception was heartbreaking. The new blend is fine. Mark. I'd overheard Arthur tell Mr. Wren, Henderson, 6 months ago. My old nose can't tell the difference anyway. He was lying to protect his pride, sacrificing his dignity. The contrast was a knife in my gut. While Arthur was stoically sacrificing his art, his identity, to hide his financial shame, I, the numbers girl, had already seen it. I had seen the discrepancy in his bank statements 3 years ago. I didn't confront him. That would have shamed him. Instead, I went to Mark Henderson. I, the useless accountant, used my hobby to set up a private, anonymous account at the store. I instructed Mark to always give Arthur the rosewood blend, but only charge him for the cheap one, with the difference paid automatically from my account. For 3 years, my useless skill was the only thing preserving Arthur's hobby. David thought my money was just numbers. He was about to find out what a ledger truly is. David's performance was worthy of a stage. He waited until 10 a.m. on Saturday, the busiest time. He walked into the crowded store, his face a mask of practiced anguish. He leaned on the counter, his voice loud enough for every aisle to hear. Mark. I need your help. It's my uncle. He paused, letting the drama build. It's Sarah. She's taking everything. He was accusing me of the very crime he was committing. He was sacrificing my reputation in the town square to get what he wanted. His deception was flawless. She's got him convinced I'm the bad guy she's after that workshop. She's taking advantage of his senility. She's isolating him. He was painting himself as the savior, the concerned family member, the one man trying to protect Arthur from me. While David was performing this Oscar-worthy monologue of public slander, I was busy. I was at the bank, standing before a notary, with Arthur by my side. I was sacrificing my lunch break, but in return, I was getting Arthur's signature on a new, ironclad power of attorney, one that explicitly revoked any and all prior claims and installed me as his sole legal protector. I was actually protecting Arthur, while David was just pretending to. He wanted to make this public. He had just given me the perfect stage for his execution. I had called Mark Henderson that morning. He'll be there at 10. I said, let him talk. I'll be there at 10:15. I walked in just as David was finishing his speech, his eyes gleaming with false tears. She's a thief, he snarled, pointing at me as I entered. The entire store went silent. This was the ultimate sacrifice. I had asked Mark, my friend, to keep my payments a secret. I had sacrificed my own desire for recognition to protect Arthur's dignity. Now, I had to sacrifice that dignity to save his life. A thief, I said. My voice calm. David was puffed up, arrogant, victorious. He thought he had me cornered, while David was preening, expecting me to crumble. I just looked at Mark Henderson. I had given him one instruction. When he accuses me, then you can show him. Mark didn't say a word. He just nodded, reached under the counter, and pulled out the thick, dusty special order log. Taking advantage, you say. David Mark's voice boomed across the silent store. He slammed the binder on the counter. A thief. He opened the book. Let's see. For the past 3 years, Sarah here has been paying for every special order for Arthur. Here's a $200 order for Brazilian rosewood. Paid. By Sarah. He turned the page. Here's $400 for that new lathe motor you told him he didn't need. Paid. By Sarah. Mark fixed David with a stare that could freeze fire. She's been preserving his legacy. You leech. While you've been sucking him dry. Mark turned one final, dramatic page. And this is a bill for $50,000. It's the certified lien I just had my lawyer file against your share of the property. For all the loans you took from Arthur that Sarah has the receipts for. The silence in the store was absolute. David was white as a sheet. He had been exposed as a liar, a thief, and a fool. He stammered. That's not. You're lying. While David was imploding, I was calm. I had just used his own public attack to detonate his credibility and establish a legal, financial weapon against him. His slander had just become my evidence. He was shunned. He backed out of the store. The eyes of the entire town burning into him. He was enraged. He had failed to attack Arthur. He had failed to attack me. His logical next step wasn't social. It was legal. He would have to bypass us and go to a higher power. My phone buzzed. It was an official email from the town zoning board. The escalation had already begun. David's escalation was immediate. He was a cornered animal. And he was done with subtlety. The email I received was not from David. It was from the town zoning board. A cold, bureaucratic PDF attachment. It cited Ordinance 42B and informed Arthur that a formal complaint had been filed. His workshop, the one that had stood for 50 years, was an illegal structure in a residential-only zone. A public hearing was set for the following Tuesday. The complaint was, of course, filed by a concerned citizens group, a shell organization David had created. He was sacrificing my uncle's peace of mind, his very sense of belonging. Arthur, a man who had paid his taxes on that property for half a century, looked at the email on my laptop, his face pale. They can just do this, he whispered. They can just take it. His hands were shaking. David's deception was immaculate. He had weaponized the very town Arthur loved against him. While my uncle was in his kitchen, his entire world shrinking to the size of that terrifying PDF. I was not panicking. I was in my element. This wasn't a workshop. It was a data retrieval problem. David, the developer, had made a fatal error. He had looked up the current zoning map. He was too arrogant, too lazy, to do a 50-year title search. He saw an old man. He had no idea he was fighting a forensic auditor. The night before the hearing, I sacrificed my own work. I was supposed to be finalizing a major quarter-end report for my firm, a report that my own promotion hinged on. Instead, I was in the cold, musty basement of the town hall, surrounded by boxes of forgotten history. I sacrificed my career momentum, my sleep, and my sanity, breathing in the smell of mildew and silverfish. David's deception was that he was a builder, a man of action. He mocked my desk job. The vile contrast was that while he was sleeping, dreaming of the condos he would build on the ashes of Arthur's legacy, I, the numbers girl, was doing the real work. I was carefully turning the brittle, Yellowed pages of the 1972 Town Council minutes. David thought he knew the law. I was reading the law's autobiography. He brought an opinion. I was looking for a fact. I found it at 2A. M. A single line item. Ordinance 1972G. Woodshop. 412 Oak Street. Grandfathered. In perpetuity. I photocopied the page. I found the original linen-backed map. I found the minutes. I went home, my hands black with archival dust, and slept for 1 hour. The hearing was a public execution. David had packed the room. He had his developer buddies in the front row, all in shiny suits, looking impatient. He had rounded up 3 concerned neighbors. He had terrified with whispers of industrial noise and plummeting property values. Arthur had to sit there, in his own town, and listen to his life's work be called a hazard, an eyesore, and a blight. He was sacrificing his dignity. His hands shaking so badly, he had to hide them under the table. David, in a crisp suit, gave a presentation filled with slides and charts. His deception was masterful. "This isn't personal," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "This is about progress. It's about protecting the community. We all love Arthur, but we cannot allow a single, unsafe hobby shop to endanger the entire neighborhood." He was painting my uncle as a public menace, a senile old man playing with dangerous toys. While David was performing, I was not listening. I was observing. I had 3 identical, black-bound reports in my briefcase, each containing 64 pages of cross-referenced evidence. He was trying to erase history. I had archived it. The new town planner, a young man in his 30s, presented the official findings. He projected the new map, dated 2003. "Mr. David is correct," the planner said, his voice apologetic. "The current zoning map clearly designates this area as R1 residential. A workshop of this nature is, unfortunately, non-compliant." It looked like a total loss. The council members looked grim. David sat back, arms crossed, a smirk of pure victory on his face. Arthur looked like he was about to be ill. This was David's guaranteed win. This was the moment his modern knowledge was supposed to defeat Arthur's old ways. He was sacrificing his own uncle's legacy to prove a point. While David was savoring his victory, I was simply waiting my turn. I had found the useless box of Arthur's old legal papers in his attic. He thought it was junk. I knew it was the key. "Thank you," I said, standing up. My voice was calm and clear. "That won't be necessary." David's smirk faltered. I walked to the council table and placed my 3 bound reports in front of the mayor. "I would like to politely correct the town planner. He is, unfortunately, using the wrong map." I unrolled the original, line-and-backed 1972 map. A gasp went through the room. "This," I said, "is the actual legal document." I opened my binder. "And this is page 47 of the 1972 council minutes, which explicitly grandfathered Arthur's workshop in perpetuity." The council's lawyer grabbed the document, his eyes going wide. He read it, then read it again. He looked at the mayor. "She's right," he whispered, loud enough for the microphone. "This ordinance, it's still the active law. The 2003 map is a general survey. This is a specific and binding legal exemption." The mayor, a friend of Arthur's, slammed his gavel. Complaint dismissed. David was sputtering, his face a mottled red. But the new map, the code." The mayor glared at him, his voice booming. "You've been exposed. Mr. David, you brought a frivolous and vindictive complaint to this council, and you wasted our time. You are lucky I don't sanction you for it." David was humiliated. He had lost the senility angle. He had lost the community angle. Now, he had lost the legal angle. He stared at me, his face a mask of pure, narcissistic rage. He wasn't thinking about the law. He was thinking about violence. I knew, as I packed my briefcase, That logic was now off the table. He was a cornered animal. He wouldn't use a lawyer next time. He'd use a crowbar. The legal victory did nothing to calm the waters. It was an accelerant. David was now 0 for 3. And his narcissistic rage had curdled into something dangerously unstable. My first sacrifice was our peace. Arthur, who had slept like a stone for 75 years, was now a ghost in his own home. He was sacrificing his mental health, his rest, just waiting for the next attack. He'd wake up at 3 a.m., convinced he heard a noise, and would sit in his kitchen chair, staring at the dark workshop until sunrise. David's deception was a masterpiece of passive aggression. He was, according to Aunt Clara, giving us space. He told the family he was praying for my anger to cool and for Arthur's confusion to pass. The vile contrast was sickening. While Arthur was sacrificing his sleep, his nerves fraying, David was sleeping soundly, having successfully convinced the family that we were the aggressors and he was the patient victim. He was painting us as the unhinged ones, all while he was in his garage, planning his next, more physical attack. The victory at the town hall had cost me. I knew David's next move would be physical. The single nanny cam was a toy. I needed a fortress. I sacrificed over $3,000, money I had meticulously saved for my own retirement fund, and bought a professional-grade security system. It had night vision, motion-activated floodlights, and high-fidelity audio recording. It was a sacrifice of my own financial security, my future, to protect Arthur's present. David's deception was that he thought we were financially weak. He had mocked my useless career, my hobby of paying Arthur's bills. He believed we were vulnerable. The irony was poisonous. While I was sacrificing my own retirement S1 to buy cameras A6, David was simultaneously sacrificing our family's reputation. He was at a different bank, applying for a high-interest bridge loan for a new R-debted Desperate development. And to get it, he was using the projected future value of Arthur's workshop as his collateral. He was borrowing money against a property he had not yet successfully stolen. He was so arrogant. He never imagined I would build a new wall he couldn't see. I knew what he would attack. It was the legacy. The most valuable thing on the property wasn't the machines. It was the sign. It was an 8-foot-tall, hand-carved oak sign that simply said, Arthur's. Arthur's father had carved it in 1955. It was his greatest sacrifice. After David's legal attack, Arthur had stood in the yard, staring at that sign. He won't stop. Will he? Arthur had whispered. He won't stop until he's turned this, my father, into dust. David's deception was that he saw the sign as junk. He had called it that. Dangerous junk. He saw it as a symbol of the old ways he was trying to progress past. While Arthur saw his father's hands, his entire family history, his dignity, in that wood, David saw only a barrier. He saw a worthless object he had to remove to get to the land beneath. He didn't understand that by targeting the sign, he wasn't just attacking a piece of wood, he was attacking Arthur's soul. I, the trapper, was ready. The cameras were not random. I am an auditor. Imitigate risque. I sacrificed an entire Sunday, a day of rest, to become a security technician. I spent 8 hours on a ladder, running wires, making every connection waterproof. This wasn't a hobby. This was a meticulous, cold-blooded trap. David's deception was his belief in his own superiority. He was a developer, a man of action. He thought I was tech illiterate, just like he assumed Arthur was. He thought he was the smart one. The vile contrast was that he was the one who was truly ignorant. He thought security was a cheap lock. He had no idea I was an expert in data systems. While he was plotting his simple, brutish attack, I was aiming the primary 40K night vision camera directly at that oak sign. I linked its specific motion sensor to the new 300-watt floodlights and to the audio recorder. He was walking into a high-definition cage. The attack came at 2:30 in the morning. A motion alert buzzed on my phone. I didn't even have to wake Arthur. I just put my hand on his shoulder and pointed to the monitor I'd set up in the hallway. David had arrived on foot, dressed in black. He was a cliché. He walked directly onto the lawn, his face a mask of rage, and went straight for the sign. He was sacrificing the last shred of his decency, his family bond, for this one pathetic act of vengeance. His deception, in his own mind, was that this was justice. He was righting a wrong. He was proving a point. He pulled a can of red spray paint from his bag. He was shaking with adrenaline as he wrote, "Senile old fool." It was a primal, hateful, physical manifestation of his entire gaslighting campaign. He was, quite literally, trying to brand my uncle with his lie. He stepped back, admiring his work, panting. A sociopath admiring his art. It was the guaranteed win. He had, he thought, finally, and untraceably, destroyed Arthur's dignity. I hit the switch. The entire yard, for a 50-foot radius, was blasted with the light of a new sun. It was so bright it was disorienting. David screamed, dropping the can, shielding his eyes as the floodlights burned away his cover. The high-fidelity audio clicked on with an audible thunk. He froze, caught in the light like a rat. Sarah and Arthur were standing on the back porch, safe behind the new, reinforced glass. Arthur picked up the microphone I had plugged into the system's loudspeaker. His voice, amplified, boomed across the entire property. A voice of God. The new night vision cameras work beautifully. David was paralyzed. He was covered in red paint. The evidence all over his hands. The police are on their way, I said, my voice just as calm, just as loud. He tried to run. He tripped, fell, and scrambled to his feet. But it was too late. The flashing blue and red lights were already rounding the corner. He had been caught red-handed, by the very junk he'd dismissed, by the very numbers girl he'd ignored. The arrest was not a victory. It was a declaration of war. David was out on bail in less than 24 hours. And the world shrank to the size of our front porch. We were sacrificing our freedom. Arthur, a man who had walked his property every sunrise for 50 years, was now a prisoner in his own home. He was sacrificing his health, his sanity, his very routine, all while David's deception continued. David had told the judge he was remorseful and terrified of his unstable cousin. Me. The vile contrast was of physical sickness, while Arthur was sacrificing his sleep, setting up a cot in the living room so he could stand watch. David was sleeping in his own bed, legally protected, having successfully painted us as the threat. I was not just an accountant anymore. I was a jailer. And I was a target. The legal bills were astronomical. I had to sacrifice more of my retirement fund, the same fund I had used for the cameras. This time, it was for a high-powered criminal attorney, not to attack David, but simply to keep him away. We were sacrificing our financial security. Again, just to exist safely. David's deception was a masterpiece of legal abuse. He had a public defender, and his lawyer argued in court that David was broke, desperate, and deeply sorry. He was sacrificing nothing. The irony was a blade. While I was sacrificing my own future, my money, to pay for protection from him, David was using public money, the taxpayer-funded defender, to continue his assault, filing motion after motion to have his restraining order lifted. He was weaponizing his poverty against my competence. Arthur, seeing my sacrifice, decided to make one of his own. He retreated into his workshop, and for 2 solid days, he performed his own magic. This was his useless hobby, the one David had mocked. Arthur, the tinkerer, was a master locksmith. He was restoring a 100-year-old bank vault lock, a monstrous thing of steel and tumblers that he had salvaged from a demolition decades ago. He was sacrificing his aching hands, his strained eyes, his physical comfort, as he meticulously repinned the lock. David's deception had always been that Arthur was senile. His old junk was worthless. The contrast was perfect. while Arthur, with shaking hands, was performing an act of precise, analog engineering. I knew David was in his garage with a crowbar. He was a brute, expecting a simple padlock. He was about to face a century of steel, wielded by a master. We installed it on a new, steel-reinforced door. The old junk had become a fortress. My final sacrifice was my career. I could not be an auditor and a bodyguard at the same time. I called my firm and requested an immediate, indefinite, unpaid leave of absence. I was at the peak of my career, and I was stepping off the ladder, sacrificing my future, my reputation, and my entire professional identity. My boss was shocked. "Sarah, this is career suicide." He was right. The family's deception was that they believed the danger was over. "David won't be back. Sarah," Aunt Clara had insisted on the phone. "He's learned his lesson." They were wrong. While the family was breathing a sigh of relief, I, the trapper, I was sacrificing everything to set the final snare. I knew he would be back. I hired a private security guard, an ex-cop, with the last of my liquid savings. I didn't tell him to patrol. I told him to hide in the shadows, armed with a radio, and to wait. I was not a victim. I was the architect of his downfall. The final night, David made his sacrifice. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his credit. He was facing a prison sentence for the vandalism. He had, as he saw it, nothing left to lose. He was sacrificing the last shred of his humanity to his rage. His self-deception was total. They had pushed him. They had stolen his future. He came just before 3 a.m. on foot. But this time he wasn't carrying a spray can. He was carrying 2 5-gallon gasoline cans. His attack was no longer personal. It was nuclear. He was going to erase the workshop, the sign, the evidence, and Arthur's entire legacy in one final, cleansing fire. He believed, in his narcissistic rage, that this was justice. He expected us to be asleep, to be weak, to be senile, while he was unscrewing the cap, splashing gasoline on the oak sign he had already defiled. We were wide awake. We were in the kitchen, calmly drinking tea, watching him on the guard's silent, infrared body cam feed, which was broadcasting directly to my laptop. David fumbled for his lighter. This was his moment of triumph. "You wanted junk," he hissed, his voice captured by the audio recorder I had hidden in the sign itself. "Here's your fire." He flicked the lighter. The spark was tiny, and then the world ended. "Drop it." The voice was not Arthur's. It was the security guard, emerging from the dark, his service weapon drawn. In the same instant, 2 police cars, the ones I had on speed dial, and who had been waiting at the end of the street for this very call, roared onto the lawn, their floodlights turning the gas-soaked yard into a midday inferno. David screamed. He dropped the lighter, which went out in the grass. He was tackled. His face slammed into the mud, the gasoline can spilling beside him. He was arrested, not for vandalism, but for attempted arson, a major, violent felony. His destruction was absolute. He went to prison. The video of his arson attempt, combined with the clear, high-definition audio of his previous threats, was undeniable. He lost his developer's license. He was financially ruined. His debts called in. His assets seized to pay for the legal fees and the new security I had installed, but his greatest destruction was social. The family, the entire town, finally saw the truth. They saw the footage. They heard the recordings. He was not a concerned nephew. He was a monster. He was shunned, disowned, and erased. Arthur, his legacy secured, his dignity restored, went back into his workshop. He picked up his father's handplane, the one David had hidden, and the sound of his work, steady and strong, was the only sound that mattered. This entire nightmare taught me that family is not always blood. Sometimes, it's the person who sees your sacrifice and honors it. And sometimes, it's the person who sees your useless skills and knows they are. In fact, weapons. David made one mistake. He thought an accountant just counted numbers. He forgot that we are the ones who find the fraud, document the crime, and, in the end, write the final, devastating ledger. Have you ever had to use a useless skill to protect yourself or someone you love? What did the people around you underestimate about you? Share your stories in the comments below. And please like and subscribe for more stories of justice.